Thank you, everyone, for joining us and participating in the 2017 Executive Leadership Summit. We're ready to jump into the fray here. We have 10 questions assembled from the EGSA membership input. Each panelist will get 2 questions and the opportunity to follow up to 2 questions. The answers per question should be right around the 4.5-minute time frame, and the follow-ups should be right around the 4.5-minute time frame. There will be no questions fielded from the audience during this session. Our first question will be to Terri Lewis of Caterpillar, with the follow-up going to Charles Hunsucker from Kohler. Question number 1. The Dow is at 22,000 approximately. We have a president who's committed to eliminating excessive regulations. By all economic indicators, our industry is doing well. Where do you think we're going to be in about 12 to 18 months, Terri?
Okay, I think from our perspective, we're a global company. We exist in every country in the world, and for us, when we're looking at the outlook, we're seeing really positive movement in terms of global trade. It's probably some of the most positive that we've seen in years. A lot of regulations that are aligning in terms of promoting that trade globally. Domestically, we're seeing the very strong market as well. Second quarter GDP was 4%. We've seen lowest unemployment in about 10 years. Seeing a little bit of an uptick in terms of inflation, but the Fed seems committed to control that and not let it get out of hand, and not overly conservative in their control of it. So I think on a macroeconomic level, we're seeing a lot of positive around the world and even domestically. As far as industries, somebody referenced our business. We do a lot in mining and resource industries, and that business has gone through probably 4 or 5 years of some of the lowest growth or lack of growth that we've seen in the history of mining. And mining is typically very cyclical, but it's geographically cyclical or by commodity, and everything hit on the downturn. The other big part of our business is construction, and we're seeing positive growth around the world, around the globe, as well as domestically. We've come off of a hiatus of China being double-digit growth in terms of construction and infrastructure, and it's 20+% growth rate, which drove a lot of frenzy and euphoria, and that kind of had to slow down and get recalibrated, and now it's back to what I'd call a normal growth rate, about 7 to 9%. So it's fun. It's starting to come back out, and we're looking very positive. Where will we be in 12 to 18 months? I think maybe part of the reason why we lost our initial moderator is going on is because of what's going to go on with the United Nations today. So economically we're positioned well for growth, but there's still a concern and a risk of stability, and President Trump is going to be speaking with the UN. So that's probably the biggest risk out there that I can see. Thank you.
Charles, you care to comment as a follow-up?
Sure. I'll take a little bit of a different spin on this. I think the question stemmed a little bit around our president being committed to reducing regulations. And I think that he certainly seems to be committed to doing that. I think the extent of success he has, and I think the impact it actually will have on the U.S. economy remains to be determined. But I don't think any of us in this room can deny, whether you're on the left or the right or where you fall on that political spectrum, I don't think anybody in the room can really deny the fact that he does seem committed to creating more jobs in the U.S., to keeping jobs here, to creating more businesses, and finding a way to level the trade tariffs as much as he can as well. So I think that's all very positive, not just for us, for the U.S. economy in general. To bring that a little bit closer to home, and I want to speak just very briefly about regulations as they relate to our industry, and I think it was Aaron did a really good job this morning of talking about the complexities of that, whether it's IBCs or CARBs or OSHPODs or what have you. There's a number of regulations within our industry, and quite frankly, it becomes very taxing on a business. And it continues to force us as a business to invest additional dollars year after year into advanced development and into new product development just to stay compliant. So there's a lot of extra work that has to go into that. My personal opinion, there's ways we could spend those dollars more effectively that could really move our entire industry forward if given the opportunity to do so. But that's not where we are today. and it doesn't even take into account the amount of state regulations. At a minimum, I would love to see us try to move forward with whatever regulations we have in our industry as one united nation versus 50 independent nations, which seems to add a lot of complexity to all of our businesses. So regardless of presidential policy, I think the economy will continue to be stable, 3-4% growth. A key indicator for us at Kohler Company that we watch very closely for our whole portfolio of business is housing starts. And we project those to be up in the 3 to 4% range over the next 12 to 18 months. And I think that really will translate into our industry with the recent storm activities. I would suspect we would see 4 to 5% minimum growth across our industry. And we'll have a fairly long tail of uptick from the recent storm activity on the residential side, both from awareness and replacement, as well as the industrial side.
Thank you, Charles. We've got a couple more minutes we could spend on this question. Matthias, you care to chip in maybe a little bit of a global perspective since you're Europe-based?
Yeah, I think for us, like over the next 12 months, I think we see a pretty strong, solid market. I see still China on the horizon, probably not as strong as it was in the past, but especially what's going on the data center side there. If you look at the bet, like Alibaba, Baidu, they really heavily investing. There's a lot of generation to catch up on data, so this is really booming for us. We have significant growth in that area. I see as well Africa coming up stronger and stronger in the power generation field, which gives us a good opportunity. And what you mentioned, I think that's a very interesting trend is in the UK, the storm market, I think you were alluding to that, how the renewables play in that field and what role power generation will play to basically back it up. So that will really define over the next 12 to 18 months our future, and I think a good growth rate will come out of that.
So it looks like we have a rosy picture ahead, folks. All right, this next question gets a little bit more technical. We're going to go to Aaron here with Mr. Savelli's follow-up comment. Here's the topic. Third-party constraints with natural gas gensets. NFPA 110 has its 10-second start time requirements. NEC 701 references reliable fuel supply. And NFPA 70 requires on-site fuel storage for prime movers. With these codes and standards in mind, are you surprised that more natural gas gensets are not being sold when compared to diesel? And of course, if you can elaborate on your answer.
Thanks. Obviously, nat gas, we see the nat gas gen market growing actually, a bit faster, at least here in the U.S. for sure. I mean, the infrastructure, the natural gas pipeline infrastructure that we have is pretty unique here in this country in terms of the breadth of its size and the ability for it to serve. I think in terms of, as you look at natural gas powered gensets as they go larger, and you look at emergency backup for mission critical type applications, clearly diesel has been the legacy favorite for many, many years. And there's a lot of reasons for that. The codes and standards obviously have driven some of that in terms of fuel reliability, in terms of on-site fuel storage. But there have been many studies recently and actually in history to show that the natural gas pipeline, in particular in times of dislocation from hurricanes and other natural events, actually the natural gas pipeline is more resilient as a fuel source than you would find in diesel fuel. I mean, how many pictures have you seen down in Florida of people trying to get gas? At one point, at the height of the storm, 50% of the gas stations there were without fuel. And the diesel distribution system as well gets disrupted. Not only just the logistics of it, trying to get a truckload of diesel fuel to a site to refuel when you have a major event like that going on, but the actual dispensaries themselves sometimes don't have backup power. So I would say, in fact, many examples of in terms of on-site fuel storage, where diesel has not been a foolproof strategy. Hurricane Katrina, many of the images there, when Katrina flooded New Orleans, the hospitals had backup power, but 2 days later you had these awful images of people being airlifted off the roofs of hospitals, and many deaths that occurred because the hospitals themselves, they couldn't refuel the gens. So, and that's I think, an opportunity area for natural gas. And as natural gas moves up in terms of the cost-benefit curve, in terms of first piece cost, today under 200 kilowatts, we see natural gas first piece cost is actually more beneficial to natural gas. And that's because you have automotive derivative engines that are built in the millions that go into those products. And I would say this, that historically, I think from an engineering perspective, engineers would tell you, electrical engineers and others systems engineers who work on these projects would tell you that, diesel engines are the most robust power plant that you can have. But I would tell you that, gas engines and gas engine technology has come a long way in the last 30 years. You think about your own vehicle, you can go basically 100,000 miles today without changing the spark plugs on your car, without a major overhaul. So there are, I would say the robustness of natural gas engines or gasoline engines are much greater than they've been in the past, and the reliability as such has increased alongside of that. So, I think what we're fighting there is a perception. I think there's a perception out there in the industry, again, by these engineers that we interface with many engineers in our efforts at the company to educate people about natural gas. We're not in the position to build our own diesel engines, as the others around me are. And obviously, as you can see, it takes a tremendous amount of not only research and development on the diesel engine side, but also on the capital equipment side, the tooling side, to continue to stay ahead of those regulations. And that just keeps adding cost into those products. So diesel gensets continue to grow in cost and continue to be higher priced in the market. And I think over time, what really will drive the market to more natural gas is the economics, the pure economics of it. And in particular, I think what's facing us now, the ability to use what historically has been treated as a stranded asset for emergency backup only, which could be turned into a more productive asset for a company in terms of demand response or some other type of effort. I think there's an opportunity there to continue, again, on the education path to educate these engineers. We've had a saying, the only way we're going to make natural gas a mainstay in power generation is by having all those engineers out there die off and get new ones. So we just keep waiting. They keep holding on. They're robust people. But no, we do all we can to educate. We find actually that younger engineers are more receptive to the idea of new technologies. Shocker, right? I know everybody out there is completely blown away by that. But older engineers, I think, pretty set in their ways in terms of, you have a backup system. You look at all the codes and regulations and standards, and you say, well, it's got to be diesel. And I think we're challenging that, and I think, frankly, the economics of natural gas are challenging that in a different way.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Alex, what would be Cummins' perspective on that?
Yeah, I think pretty aligned with Aaron. I think, like Aaron, we probably see, when you actually look at sort of overall, from a growth rate, probably gas, gensets these days probably growing almost twice the clip of diesel. And again, a lot of that, it is more a phenomena here in the U.S., and a lot of that because of gas availability improvements. And I think, too, between Hurricane Sandy and Hurricane Katrina, that really drove quite a bit of that, right? So, most of the when you sort of look at sort of the jobs and the projects that you have in the East Coast these days, where traditionally people would have spec diesel, these days it's predominantly, more natural gas. And I think the only caveat that I'd sort of say, Aaron, it does work very well for non-seismic areas. So seismic, when you do have a seismic, especially,
it's true.
That is probably where diesel, may still have an edge, right? And then the other interesting dynamic, just to explore a little bit of different angle there. It's true with demand response, and where you do have deregulation, and all of a sudden you can start leveraging that stranded asset, to put power back on the grid. Again, depending how many hours you're running, gas certainly, also has an advantage. I think one of the key challenges, of gas versus diesel too is the transient response of the gas product. Certainly from the standpoint of time to take load and how you react or how the product reacts, diesel still has an edge. And I mean, that's one piece that we need to continue, make gas engines, more like diesel-like performance. But I also think, from an environmental point of view, although gas is also, a carbon, fuel, it is, cleaner than diesel. And I think from an environmental point of view, there is a, more and more of a push, towards that, right? So we do see, again, this trend is here to stay. And we're certainly committed to making sure that our gas product line not is as good as the diesel one. The last piece that I'd sort of say, perhaps not as much in the U.S., but it's also proof of where you do have gas availability. People are leveraging these days. If you go to places like Australia, where mining got hit pretty hard, and total cost of ownership and running a mine, is very fuel dependent. We actually have even seen places that, were using diesel, actually moving to gas as a way of actually bringing down their operating costs, right? So it's even in places more of a that type of prime power and distributed generation type of setup. I think we'll also see more gas, but in places where gas is available, right? And obviously with the advent of LNG and all the investments being made, I think there'll be more and more places that will be able to do that.
Beautiful. Good job, Alex. I ask a quick follow-up here. Does anybody in the panel know of a case where there's, say, Hurricane Kim, just to grab a name out of the sky here, where Hurricane Kim comes into a major metropolitan area where a natural gas utility will turn off the utility in advance or during this situation? Has anybody ever heard of that type of case?
The only instances we've seen is when there's known fires, right? So when there's a fire, they want to shut the gas off. But what we found, and this is even in earthquake-prone areas, the gas companies are incredibly adept at shutting off the parts of the pipeline that are compromised. They're very specific. I mean, they have the level of control.
So it doesn't have to be the entire system.
The level of control that can be taken there, and that's where even in the seismic regions, gas, oftentimes there are gas lines that are compromised, but it's a localized, it's almost like a tornado hitting a particular structure. It's a very localized event. So the gas network itself is generally remains
Actually, I think I
stable.
recall Hoboken, New Jersey, during Sandy, seeing the broken pipes with the flames flaring out.
And we had very few instances where customers couldn't get gas for their units. It may have happened briefly for a period of time, but then the gas company knows the importance of gas as a primary fuel for many residences and businesses. So the uptime is very important.
Okay. Excellent question and excellent discussion. All right, moving on. This question will go to Alex with a follow-up to Matthias. As we know, Tier 4 final emission compliant engines are currently required for diesel mobile and prime power generator applications. Do you see Tier 4 final diesels being specified nationwide one day in what is today a standard Tier 3 compliant emergency backup type application?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's it is a very relevant topic from overall where we stand today. There's no immediate discussion as far as sort of taking it across, for all the standby applications. I think there was at the time, and this kind of probably goes back, sort of when the Tier 3 discussion was taking place. There's quite a bit of activity. I think back then, we did try to overall, especially from a policy-making point of view, educate folks on the benefits and the costs of actually, moving to Tier 4 final, right? Especially for if it's equipment that, does run most of the time and is generating a lot of potential NOx and other, emissions components. Certainly, the benefits might outweigh the costs. If it is a set, basically a generator set that, doesn't run more than 10 or 15 hours, it's really hard to justify, right? So I think there's probably, I'd be surprised if over time there's not increased pressure to also, implement that and then, even eventually, move to zero emissions. I think we need to continue to engage to educate folks on, what are the costs of that taking place. And it brings up an interesting point that sort of relates to, the gas discussion that we just had, right? Because if you do go into, if the day comes where, and it's not, by the way, it's not like the industry doesn't know how to offer Tier 4 final and we're not ready, right? Because we are doing this in many of our other industrial markets. I mean, it is really just trying to be very upfront as far as here's what's costing, the consumer, and this society really wants to have this for the benefit of almost not running it, right? But assuming that, it's not a question of if, it's more when. When that time comes, one of the other interesting twists is probably a diesel genset. By the time you add up all the Tier 4 final, after treatment and all the related components there, it probably would be as expensive, if not more expensive than a equivalent natural gas generator set. So at that stage, probably you'd see even increased adoption of natural gas, almost as a natural sort of fuel choice. So I think just to summarize, it is a possibility. I think we're ready for when that comes. I think we'll continue to be vocal as far as sort of the cost benefits of moving to that, and certainly from a what else do you offer in addition to diesel? I think certainly gas would even be a better choice. I think overall for both the consumer and the environment when the time comes.
Thank you, Alex. Matthias?
Yeah, I mean, fully agree, Alex. I think we invested heavily as an industry, Cummins, CAD, and as well MTU in Tier 4 products, especially in the larger range. I think the technology is there, and I think over time it will come more and more. You see more and more emission-restricted areas, so where this goes in and will go in. I think for me, as you said, it's a matter of time when it comes stronger into the market, and will it come in the standby market as well. I think in certain areas it will come. I mean, you will see it in California, you will see it in New York, coming in faster than maybe somewhere in the middle of nowhere. But
Mankato, perhaps.
Mankato, for example, right in the middle of nowhere. But I think the cost of Tier 4 will really be high and extensive. So I think the solution of putting gas in and gas standby really is a valid option. And I think we as an industry will work or have to work on reducing basically the load acceptance of a gas engine. And that will probably change the picture further towards gas. I think as well, really reducing it over time, coming back to my presentation, the battery will play a role, because at the end we're going to try to reduce CO2, and that really you're trying by downscaling the whole equipment and as well the efficiency. So I think this will play a role as well in our further emission discussion. The big question is what comes after Tier 4. Is there the next stage, and will this go on? I'm pretty sure it will. It's not the end. I think the industry was stretched a lot by Tier 4, and they will stretch us again in 2021, 22 to go to the next level. And then Tier 4 becomes basically the standby rating, and Tier 5 will then become the prime rating, from my opinion.
Excellent. But as we sit here today, Aaron, we got a few more minutes we can spend on this question. Why would some authority, say in Brooklyn, specify a Tier 4 final diesel unit, say a 500 kilowatt, when it's not required by law?
Best available technology. I mean, what you'll see in a lot of bids that, in particularly, I think Matthias is right. You have certain regions in the country that are, I would say, either more sensitive or in tune with best available technologies for emissions, right? So California, clearly a leader, long time, but you are seeing major metropolitan areas. New York City is a great example. We took a project last year for the New York City Housing Authority that is basically a Sandy rebuild effort, and they went with all gas. And the reason they chose all gas was twofold. One, they felt that the emissions footprint of those products would be less invasive than a diesel footprint, and they wanted the upside of potential demand response for the machines. So, load acceptance is certainly one thing. There are things you can do certainly technically to get around that with booster pumps and other things that certainly help with that. But the technology has come a long way. I mean, the gas systems today, we all have gas products that meet NFPA 110. So, we're meeting the 10-second start requirement today. There are, and I think Alex is spot on. If the Tier 4 discussion does continue to advance and it advances on a national basis, we're already dealing with it today on mobile equipment. And in fact, the Tier 4 interim mobile products were difficult because of the technologies in place at the time. Most mobile gensets in a rental application don't get enough load. And when you don't have enough load, bad things happen with in the IT4 engines in particular. But I think it does favor gas longer term. I think just, again, from a pure cost standpoint, you add all that additional cost, the after treatment, the operating costs, you're also dealing with very low sulfur fuel. So the spoilage around fuel, that issue continues to be a perennial issue for emergency backup diesel gensets. Gas eliminates that weak point as well in the system. So, but I go back to economics. Things in the world, on economics alone, I think move in certain directions, and this would be one that if Tier 4 final became the standard de facto in the industry, I think it would move that cost point from 200 kW today to a much higher position on the curve.
Absolutely. All right, thank you, folks. This next question has a two-part framework to it. We'll go to Charles and then Terri. So if you can limit your answers to part one to around 2 minutes, and we'll come back to round two for about a 2-minute answer for that as well. When it comes to companies that are selling, when it comes to companies that are building themselves around combining technologies, microgrids, it seems like for the last 4 to 5 years, these technologies have emerged even more so. What burgeoning technologies will impact traditional standby sales by, say, 2020? And I'm referencing specifically here battery storage, solar, wind.
Well, I want to start by making sure that I'm cautious not to sound dismissive of any of these technologies. However, over the next few years, I really don't anticipate any of them being a real threat to a traditional standby need. Doesn't mean that the technologies won't continue to advance and get better. We know there's a lot of very smart people working to figure those out, but I don't think that's going to happen by 2020 for sure. If you need standby power, you're looking for dependability, you're looking for reliability when whatever your primary source is fails. I don't think batteries do that. They don't generate electricity or energy, they just store it. I don't think that solar or wind are dependable or reliable enough yet to offer that as a traditional standby backup power. But if you start combining 2 or 3 of those together, it becomes very cost ineffective as a solution to overtake standby. So I don't think any of them are a threat to us today, but we're very aware that they could become in the future. Now, we had a technical innovation summit at Kohler a couple of months ago, and the presenter that was there, she threw out a fact that I thought was fascinating. In 1955, when the first Fortune 500 list came out, 89% of those companies are no longer in existence because they failed to adapt to the change that was happening around them. So the big question to us as engine genset manufacturers is how do we adapt to the changes that are coming? How do we increase our own value propositions, whether it's emissions or noise levels or size or footprint or whatever the case is? I think it really puts it back on us to just make sure we're driving things forward to compete with wherever it goes, because it will change.
If I could just add to that, and I apologize, Terri, but I think one thing that as an industry what we need to do, these technologies aren't going away. To your point, they may not be cost effective, but I think it's important for us to figure out how gensets can be integrated into those systems. Because I think when you stand back and you look at it, there are days when the sun's not going to shine or days that the wind isn't going to blow. I thought it was an interesting thing that was a phenomenon when we had the solar eclipse, and all the this solar capacity that was supposed to go offline, and everybody was talking. I'm like, it gets dark every day. Yeah. I don't understand. Why is this such an important topic? But I think it's important to figure out how to position generators, either as a backup asset or in a hybrid type of situation as a component in some of these systems.
Thank you, Aaron. Terri, what would be Caterpillar's take on that?
I guess we're in gas gensets, we're in diesel, and we're also embarking on microgrids or hybrid. and seeing a lot of growth. And actually, funny enough, some of our biggest pull is in Africa. It goes back to the economics, right? And so it's a little bit dangerous for fuel distribution in terms of, you know, getting fuel into some of these sites. So we're seeing a lot of it as a complement of the business. I think it's going to be here to stay, and we're just going to have to see how it comes. PV panels, the technology, I mean, the cost of it is coming down, increasing, I mean, hugely, significantly. It used to be you had to have government subsidies or some sort of subsidy behind it to be able to afford it, and that's the cost.
Now it's just
coming.
the China government that is the subsidy.
Well, it's also Germany.
Yeah, it's
right?
Germany.
Yeah, so, you know, in terms of the amount of renewables that's also required, looking at utilities that are looking at renewables as a percentage of their business. So I think it's here and it's going to grow, and we're embracing it and putting that as part of our product offering.
Yeah.
And the utilities factor into part two of this question. Go back to Charles, and then Terri, if you could comment when Charles is completed. How about utility involvement? Both co-ops, deregulated utilities, have programs that involve the selling of a standby generator that they can control regarding demand response. There are also regulated utilities that are reaching out to their existing customer base for these programs. Do you view the public utility company as a competitor?
Short answer is no. I'm not sure if I'm missing something, but from my standpoint, I would view utilities more as an opportunity or an additional sales channel than I would a competitor. We all know, and we've spoken a lot about it today, the utilities are stressed in some areas of the country, in other areas not so much. And the models are a little outdated. Well, that's what drives the whole demand response issue in the first place. If you take a step back and kind of think about Americans, we want what we want, when we want it, we don't want to pay more, we don't want to be inconvenienced, and that comes with our electrical consumption as well. So I look at that and based on my limited knowledge of demand response programs, most of them do one or two things. They either incentivize you to use less, which doesn't really work for a lot of people, or they charge you more if you use more than they want you to. This doesn't really work for a lot of people. Or they'll incentivize you to find your own alternative source of backup power on your own, which again, I think plays right into our hands as an opportunity to figure out how to leverage that into an additional sales channel.
Okay.
I guess same kind of perspective, I think, on the utilities is we see them as a customer, and I would say actually as a partner. I work closely with a couple utility companies, and I think going back to this whole disruptive perspective of technology and the impact on their business is one of them in particular is they really challenged their organization is how not to become the Kodak of the utility business. And so they're really starting to embrace innovation in terms of what they're doing, and a big part of that is Internet of Things. And I showed some of those numbers about the efficiency of the network, and this is really where it gets into collaborating with them around data and an optimization model that's beyond what their scope of distribution and generation is. So that's pretty exciting. And then I see them also getting into, embracing renewables is not just a regulated issue, but also in terms of a brand image and being, clean to the consumers. So I think that's pretty exciting about what's going on with the utility companies. They're in a tough position, I think.
Okay. Thank you very much. Moving on. This next question is for Mr. Vogel, with Aaron as a follow-up in the follow-up slot. Most of us are aware of the traditional end markets in our industry. Are there any new end customer markets that are heating up, such as edge computing, hyperscale data centers, as example?
I mean, they're heating up, and they're heating up probably since 5-6 years. So it's probably nothing new that data centers are really growing and growing. And I think somebody was elaborating today on driving cars autonomous, and our self-driven cars will generate even more data that will increase the size of data centers, and therefore I think that's going to be an upcoming trend and will stay. So I think that's a very positive spot. I think we touched about hospital, nursing homes. I think that's going to be a trend. Our population is aging, so more and more people need such kind of places, and I think it's our challenge and our responsibility to back them up and power them up. So I think that's one of the areas we are in. And then I think we discussed it just now. I think renewable playing a big role in the future in the energy network. I mean, Germany was powered 8 days last year only on renewable, nothing else. But that brings a big stress to the network. I mean, we have it 50 hertz, where you have it 60 hertz here, and we don't want to have any fluctuation in that network. So I think our industry can play a big and strong role in stabilizing the grid. And that's, I think, the biggest spot we have in the future to really build the industry around microgrids and smaller grids, which are safer and can be as well in storms as well, be better protected than a big national grid. So I think there's a huge potential for us to play in that space and really get a footprint into that and really playing into the energy market more than we do today with recip, with gas, with batteries, with all kind of technologies.
Okay, thank you, Matthias. Aaron?
Yeah, I would say, it's, again, echoing Matthias's comments, not necessarily new markets, but maybe markets that continue to grow more quickly than some of the other verticals that are in our space, but will be the residential market, light commercial, where you see small business, what we refer to in our business as the optional standby market, right? So it's not code driven, it's an optional standby. So, it's a business decision for a small business, or could be a property valuation decision for a homeowner, if you're worried about your basement flooding or your pipes bursting in the wintertime. Also, as people age in place, obviously a huge trend in this country. I mentioned before, one of the outgrowths of not having enough labor is that people are aging. As they age, they want to stay in their homes as long as possible. Nobody wants to move out of your home and move to a care facility. Everybody wants to stay in their home as long as they can. So people, we find, are taking that home that's been paid off because they've been there for 20 or 30 years, and they're investing back in the home after they retire to make it more livable for longer, to give them independence well into their 70s, 80s, 90s. And that oftentimes, they lower the countertops, they'll add paddle switches, they'll add walk-in tubs and things that I'm sure are interesting for the Kohler company on the other side of your business. But for us, it also comes with a standby generator, because to be without power in your home when you're younger is one thing, but as you get older, as you age, you become more susceptible to climate, the change in climate in your home. And oftentimes there's home medical equipment. You see a trend towards that, oxygenation, even some home dialysis, things like that need to have backup power. So we see the residential market today, it's less than 4% of US households that have permanently installed backup power. And so there's 96% of that market that still is unserved. And so that would be one vertical. The other one, again, the small businesses would be an area that, for them, a backup power system traditionally has been viewed as too expensive, cost prohibitive, didn't make sense. But as outages continue to be more frequent in this country and last longer, you have inventory spoilage issues. You obviously have just continuity of revenue issues for businesses, process interruption if it's a manufacturing facility. So there are decisions there, and quite frankly, if you get into a genset that is less expensive than a diesel, and again, the gas genset cost being favorable at a certain point, it can make out to be a very good business decision. So we see those two segments. The other one I'd add to that is the telecommunications area, which is not a new segment, but again, I think was demonstrated with this latest outage. We serve all of the major wireless carriers, and some of those wireless carriers have had plans for a lot longer than others. Verizon Wireless has been, they've been very staunch about making sure their network is hardened. And AT&T, not as much. And what you saw with Irma down in Florida was that Verizon was able to come out and say that they had 90% uptime on their sites, on all their cell sites. And AT&T, just said they're working on things. So they didn't quote a number. There were a lot of AT&T customers without service. And I think what it'll do is it'll continue to put it to the forefront. I actually think this is an issue where it's going to go from being an optional product to actually being a regulated product, because there is so much critical communication going across wireless. I don't see how that can't be regulated at some level. And we do see a future where that becomes a mandatory requirement somewhere down the line.
Excellent. Thank you, Aaron. Charles, I see you making some notes here. Would you like to jump in on this?
Well, think most of what Aaron spoke to is where our head was as well, as far as, we see residential as having huge impact. Beyond that, we're really looking at not really new markets, but multi-use high-rises. It's a big opportunity that we're seeing continue to increase, as well as manufacturing facilities, and of course, data centers. And I think all of these, what they really have in common is not that they're new markets, but it's how they're approaching the market themselves and the way they look at it from a very well laid out and thought out plan to how they're going to provide power and backup power to their facilities. A lot of them are being built where they can continue to add on as their usage expands as well, which I think is a good market for us to be able to get in on the front end, but help them lay out a good, well thought out plan that can be added and bolt on down the road. So that was the notes I was writing.
Excellent, thank you. This next question, Aaron, when I saw your slide about the talent gap, I knew we assigned this to the right guy. This is kind of a multi-pointed question, so hopefully you can remember all this. How do we bring on-site power to the millennial generation? How do we cultivate young talent and make them understand we're a big piece of the infrastructure and a path that they could consider as a career? Do you and your dealers have relationships with power gen trade schools? If so, what are you getting from that relationship? We go to Aaron and Alex for a follow-up on this one.
I thought that question was coming to me because I was the youngest panelist, maybe. But
possibly.
Closest to that
Possibly.
millennial generation. At least I like to think that way. But
Almost millennial.
But the millennial generation, and I think our comments, my comments earlier about the talent gap, I mean, certainly getting younger people involved in our industry is an important part of the vitality of the industry long term, right? I mean, it's one thing to be in an industry 5, 10, 15, 20 years, but we all had to start somewhere, whether we transferred in from another division of another company or we started our careers basically in this industry. The biggest challenge is getting people attracted to what oftentimes is viewed as a kind of an old industry, a non-technology, it's just manufacturing in general is I think a difficult industry. As OEMs, I think we all struggle with this. And as a parent, I'd probably struggle with this too. If my kid came home and said, "Hey, I want to go into manufacturing," my first question would be, "Okay, like in engineering or in what part of manufacturing?" "No, I want to build products." "Nah, I don't know. I want to weld." These are great skill sets, and I think that too often times in a lot of primary schools and their foundational education, kids are driven to a path that is, everybody wants to go to college. College isn't for everybody. Technical schools have been hollowed out. Shop classes, right? My son didn't even have shop class in high school. I said, "You gotta be kidding me. They're not working on cars anymore." Partly because, you open the hood on your car and there's nothing you can do in there anymore anyway. But nonetheless, with all the cool diagnostic tools and things, there actually are things you can do. And I think if the right approach is taken, you can get kids excited about the technology end of our industry for sure. I mean, I look at what we're doing with controls. Controls alone in terms of just the remote monitoring, all the things that Terri talked about, IoT and all the cool diagnostic stuff. I mean, that's cool stuff. And you need people to not only write the software, but also do all of the creation of the firmware, the hardware itself, the integration of all of those pieces. I mean, I think that's just cool at the product level. But then also in the manufacturing floor, as I said before, automation, that's pretty cool stuff. I mean, you go out on any of our factory floors, anybody up at this panel today, and you're gonna see, and when you go see the Cummins plant in Fridley, you're gonna see automation. You're gonna see some pretty cool stuff, some high-tech stuff. We're all putting a lot of capital to work, and we need to have the people available, the workforce available to do that. So what we've done is, we've done what I think most people around here have done is we've found technical schools in our backyard to try and develop programs, whether they be power generation specific for technicians, or whether it's manufacturing and automation in general, or controls in general. Electronics engineering is another specialized skill set. It's very difficult to find good talent gap or good talent in those fields. I think there's great programs. We support locally fund programs. Lego's got their robotics programs and things that kids really get into and have a lot of fun with. You try and find many of these STEM programs, these STEM-related programs, science, technology, engineering, and math programs that you have to get to kids early on. And you have to actually get to their parents just as early on. Because you have to tell them that manufacturing is not dumb, dirty, and dangerous, right? The 3 Ds, that manufacturing has always been painted with that brush. You go out on our shop floors today, it's a great place to work. And it's high tech, it's clean, it's very comfortable. And I think it's an environment that can be a great alternative path for a lot of people. Where college, a traditional 4-year degree, how many more sociology majors and history majors can we get? I guess the world needs baristas, right? Otherwise Starbucks is screwed. But for those of you out there, a lot of those majors are just they're not, unfortunately, as applicable to a lot of our industries for sure. Maybe in academia they work, but in our industry it's just not as applicable. So you have to find the right areas to interface. We think we're trying to do what we can do locally. I think this is one of the areas where the industry can really come together because we do everything compartmentalized, right? We're doing everything around Generac in Waukesha, Wisconsin. And you guys are doing everything around Kohler, and you guys in Mankato, and you guys in Fridley, and down in Peoria. I mean, everybody's got their own thing going. And what we need to do as an industry is we need to find a platform and get it out there, get a message out there, and create a cohesive message, and then find all the right places to interface.
Tell me your kid's not working at Starbucks.
My kid's not working at Starbucks.
Thank you.
No.
Thank
Not yet.
Alex?
We do need the baristas.
I
one of them, so.
I agree. They serve a useful purpose.
No, I couldn't agree more with Aaron. I think a lot of it is perception becomes reality, right? But we do have overall, whether it's sort of manufacturing industry, or even when people in general, even think about diesel engines or diesel-related products, many times, I mean, a lot of people still think about those, sort of smoke-billowing trucks from 1970 and all of that, right? But even like if you fast forward to these days, even like what Volkswagen just went through with the Dieselgate scandal doesn't help the industry either, right? No. So I think, we got to make sure from a communication point of view, whether we're talking to millennials or in general to society, we do set the record, straight about, that the role, our products have to play in the society. As one, but then as far as millennials, I do think just the draw on high tech, environmental friendly, sustainable solutions, all of that, that is really. I do have a brother who's about 15 years younger than I am, is actually a millennial, and usually I compare notes a lot at home, and you can tell. Just the way he thinks and behaves, it is completely different, right? But I do think the whole point about actually explaining to folks how high tech of an industry we are, and a lot of that, what drove us there, has to do with investing on decreasing emissions and all that, while still keeping product performance and reliability, right? That is a big piece, but I do think also as we kind of evolve to this more distributor generation or just regenerated world with multiple hybrid solutions, optimizing the systems, and whether it's sort of the controls or some of these new technologies that are coming to play, that can also be a potential, a good angle to also explore to them that, hey, we're not sitting on our laurels, right? We are doing stuff about it, and we'll be here and ready and sort of help shape things. And if you want to be part of it, it can actually be pretty attractive, career, right? So I would certainly explore that angle. And then I do think, the work that we do with agencies or, technical colleges, it is pretty important. I was yesterday, like many of us in the panel here, Cummins we do quite a bit of corporate responsibility work. One of the agencies that I was visiting yesterday, Junior Achievement, they have this business town setup where they take kids, to spend a day there, just trying different professions. And one of the discussions we were having there, Aaron, was exactly the point you brought up. Just as an example, most of the things that they had there talked about, professions where you do need a college degree and all that. I mean, there was, you know, no tradesman or nothing more from a vocational point of view, which is pretty important. Right? So even just part of that interaction, we got talking to them about, hey, you know, what if, you know, we had this or that, but from, you know, electrical and mechanical installations and skills on that, it's actually a really important part of our trade, right? There's the manufacturing aspect. One of the places where I think most of us, you know, struggle these days, if you take it to distribution retail, you know, qualified electrical technician or even mechanical technician, it is really hard to come. And many times, I was even telling the junior achievement people yesterday, those folks actually make more money than engineers, right? Depending on when you are in your career. And it's really important that people understand that, right? And we continue to promote that, right? So I think whether it's sort of through, you know, some of the community involvement or with the technical colleges, we also have formal programs where we do this technical education, you know, fostering that, and then, you know, some of that, you know, does go into the industry, some we also hire, and we'll certainly continue to promote that, you know, including for millennials.
Excellent. Great discussion.
Charlie, can I have 30 seconds?
Please.
Okay, sorry. You know, I've had a huge amount of fun in my career, and as being a female, I want to ask everybody in the audience, how many people have daughters? How many of you are encouraging your daughters into the business? Good starting point.
Yep.
Excellent. 30
They're
seconds.
50% of our population, who are a little bit more, right there.
Maybe one day we can get, if we keep working on this issue, maybe we can get a 12-year-old kid to say someday, instead of I want to be a fireman, I want to be a generator technician. Or I want to be a generator salesperson. That seems like a stretch at this point, but it's certainly possible. Charles?
Yeah, if I could just take, and I'll try to keep it to 15 seconds.
That's fine.
You know, and I think just to add on to what all of them just stated, the millennial generation, from our perspective, they want to feel as if their work is important. It's adding value somewhere in society. And I think, you know, just tagging on to my message this morning, the more we can line up with that humanitarian side of things and how what our industry does really helps those out there when they're in need, I think that really resonates with the younger generation.
Absolutely. Great discussion, folks. My son is an attorney. He asked, should I join the company business? I'm like, well, if you want a life of misery, pain, profanity, and groveling, come on in.
That didn't help.
But he became an attorney instead. All right.
Good point.
Noble.
All right. This is the next topic is a little delicate to some dealers in the room. We're going to talk a little bit about e-commerce. Let's go to Mr. Hunsucker here with Aaron following up. We see that Amazon tiptoeing into the residential generator space, and I guess the question is, in your opinion, do you see the Amazons of the world, considering they're a $136 billion company, coming into the industrial commercial side of things?
Well, I'll start by saying that about a month ago, 2 months ago, Jeff Bezos became the richest man in the world, and he did it in about less than 20 years. So I'm not going to put anything past him or create any doubt there. I think, and I'll start by hitting on the business that's out there today, on the residential light commercial business that's sold online. You know, there's a number of companies that are out there who, unlike Amazon, specialize in the power market, and they do a really nice job with it. And frankly, they do a lot more than tiptoe in it today. There's some very sizable, substantial businesses, you know, with kind of 150 kilowatt and down, single phase gas type units. So I think that will continue to grow and evolve as a very strong channel for a number of us in this room. The big missing ingredient there that some of them have really figured out as well is how to connect the person buying the unit with someone local in the market, an authorized dealer, to do the startup, the service, the maintenance, and make sure it's installed and handled properly. So that's on that side of it. Now, if you transition over into the commercial and industrial side, my opinion, I do not see a place for that anywhere today. And if you just look at the complexity of an industrial genset and all of the pieces that are involved in that, from the decision makers and influencers, from engineers to end users to contractors, you take all of that into account, it's a tough market for someone on the other side of an online business to reach. And then you certainly cannot dismiss the vital role that all of our distributors play in that process, from specification to the technical expertise, to the startup, the commissioning, the back and forward of the submittal processes that have to take place. And so I don't know that anybody can really replace that anytime soon from a online company. And then lastly, back to the distribution influence there and the importance that they play. The products that we sell are extremely dangerous if not handled properly. And there's a lot of liability to all of us sitting up here today if we put that in the hands of the wrong people. And from our standpoint, we will continue to put that trust in the hands of our distribution partner.
Okay, Aaron?
Yeah, I think the Amazon, the evolution of Amazon, the disintermediation of brick and mortar retail as a result. And I mean, how many retailers this year have filed for bankruptcy? Toys R Us last night, I wept as I sat there and watched that. That's we need toy stores in this world. That's really a bummer. So I guess we got to go to Walmart to get our toys or Amazon, which is where the world's going with this. But Amazon is it's a great example. We talked a lot about technology, batteries and fuel cells and other technology. I think you have to be cognizant of the fact that technology can disrupt not only at a product level, but can disrupt at a distribution level as well. And Amazon's a classic example of that, going from 0 to $136 billion. Now, I think with an installed product, I think Charles is right. I think Amazon certainly can move a lot of cash and carry type products, things that you would run to the store and get. You can have that delivered to your door instead. There's no question that the convenience of that for people and the speed at which they figured out logistically how to do that is valuable. But for a product that requires even a little bit of engineering or certainly a bit of installation, that's a different animal. Amazon actually is a partner of ours, but not a huge customer, to be very honest, in our installed products categories. In our cash and carry products, they are. Power washers, port gens, those types of products, pumps, things where you don't have to actually have an installation take place. I think where they may serve a role, though, is as a kind of a distribution layer, right? A holder of inventory. And that can be, maybe they're not going to do the installation, but for distribution to buy from another distribution partner because there's availability and there's stock. I think that's where it may make some sense. In the industrial world, I don't feel that they're probably going to have a place to play. Again, I think it would be more of if they do it all, it'll be in standardized product, and it'll be in product that I think more looks like a cash and carry. But I don't think there's any denying that they're going to continue to march forward. And you can't put your head in the sand on it. I mean, it's not going to go away.
Yeah. Maybe I can add a little bit to that, because I mean, we have long discussions in our management how this plays out and what would be disruptive in our industry. And I think we should not underestimate what is coming there. I mean, I think a lot of people looked away and saying, "Oh, Amazon will not come in our space." I mean, even in the aircraft industry, which is definitely more sensitive to security and safety and everything, they're looking heavily at disruptive and past the market. So I think we have to move ourselves in a space where it's a lot about service and value to the end customers, and that's how we differentiate. If we think we just can stay there as traders, I don't think that will work, because Amazon can be better at trading products. So all the discussion we had about service techs and people who really can explain the product, I think is really, really important for industry, that we're going to move the scale up, not to be disrupted by Amazon, where it's definitely easy to buy in the future. Huh?
Okay, thank you for that input. Yes.
I guess being in the tech space, I see this as hugely disruptive. Maybe not the Amazon, but I'm seeing it in other industries. I cover marine. There's online trading in terms of parts and service. If you want somebody that's certified to be able to do an install, then you get this whole concept of a Uber mechanic or Uber installer. They're all outside of our network. So with our dealer network, we're looking at this very seriously as a disruptor that, when it'll happen, don't know, but we do know it will happen, and it is happening. And if you just look at some of these parallel industries, mining is also down that path. I think it's going to happen.
Agree.
That's something to keep an eye on. Thank you. Next up, Alex, with Matthias following up. Everyone on the stage competes with one another. What is a topic that you would consider important enough to work together on for the betterment of the industry?
So it's a very good question. Thanks for I think it's a reminder for why we're here, right, as a trade association group. And I think we touched on some of them today, two or three that are, I think, pretty important. And I think rather than trying to do like a long list, I think it's probably for us as a group, to perhaps focus on two or three, right? And I do think the first one on, just regulation in general is a very good one. And it is obviously, it would certainly be, whether it's at a federal level or state level, I think just in terms of educating policy making and certainly trying to influence, for better outcome, it is something, it is one area that we certainly should look into and pursue. And, it could be in several aspects, of it, all the way up to safety. We talked about just emissions in general. One of the areas, where, for the from a distributor generation reality, for that to actually start permeating even more places. Certainly, what role we as an industry have to play to sort of help, firm up, stabilize the grid, and also, so to do all of those are just examples of that. So certainly regulations would be one. And then the other one that I'd sort of say, I think the talent piece that we just talked about, Aaron kicked it off and we kind of already discussed, it is a pretty serious one. I think it does aggravate as we kind of move into sort of millennial generation and all that, but it is something that we, it is something that I think definitely it's worth us sort of tackling, as a group. So those would be the two I'd vote for. Regulation, in all the different aspects, and as well as, talent.
Yeah, I agree. I think regulation, especially with the Engine Manufacturer Association, where we all about emission, I think that's really an important part for this industry to play in on tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, tier 5. I think we're spending high numbers of millions into that technology, and I think it's our obligation basically that we're going to lead that path and put forward good regulations. That plays a role for the US, but I think it plays a role for a global base as well, because emission legislation just drift between different countries, and building different engine platforms for different markets will just increase the cost additionally. So I think that's really a playing field where we have to work together. As well, then the whole area of regulations, how do we connect to the grid, and how we can influence that in a better way that the grid connections get easier. I think there's a lot of work to be done, especially in the US. And then the things we touched on, basically really talent is, how do we train our people, how do we educate them in a better way, and how do we make this market or the segment more attractive in terms of talents and bringing talent into our team, not playing so much in the dirty game, as you said, more like on this is energy, this is the energy market, and it's here to stay. I mean, energy is one of the big drivers of future generations, and I think we can play a big role into that if we work heavily together in that field.
Okay. Charles, you got a couple more minutes on that topic. You want to?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, and I agree with everything that's been stated, but what I would really add to that is what I talked about this morning. I think how we collectively as an industry can plan and collaborate and coordinate an industry response plan during emergency situations. I think that could really go a long way, not just for helping individuals, but also for promoting our industry. There's a number of benefits there that I think collectively it would take some efforts for us to get together and figure out what makes sense based on the fact that we are competitors in the market, but what does make sense for us to work together on how to promote our industry and provide better relief.
I agree. I thought the tech share thought that Will Frigno came up with was beautiful. I think there's some other guys that helped collaborate with him on that, but that's a great example. All right, next one has to do with Tesla. So we'll go to Matthias and then Terri on this one. If electric vehicles grow as much as projected, where does the charging power come from? Tesla's projecting 1 million vehicles a night potentially getting plugged in at some point in time to an already stressed grid. What happens? How does this get factored in the power supply equation?
Yeah, I like this question. This is a great question. I think it's a huge opportunity, actually. Yes, on the one hand, if everybody comes home at 6 o'clock in the night and plugs in his electrical car, it demands power from the grid. But I think it's so important that we make this grid more smarter. So does really everybody needs at 6 o'clock to load his car, or can he do it at 7, 8, 9, or can the neighbor who has more power give something to his neighbor so we can share? So out of assumption, this 1 million cars get another storage basically for our network. And saying they have 200 kVW per car, multiply that by 1 million, you have a lot of storage. And I think if we're going to play in that field and think about a smarter way to distribute that energy, I think it gives us a huge potential. Instead of a threat to the grid, it gives an opportunity to the grid from my perspective. As well, I think it gives a certain threat to our industry. If you have the car in the garage and it gives you enough power basically to power your house. Then the question really comes, do you need another backup power in your house? Yes, if you drive the car away, what happens then? But I think there's a lot of things which we don't think probably today about the potentials of this. And maybe in Germany, where this whole thing is really driven, and the UK, and as well Sweden and Norway, where they make that a rule, there's a lot of discussions going on in that area. I think it's going to be super exciting to play in that space and just find your niche in that area, and will really help us to further enhance our capabilities.
Okay. Terri, can our grid handle this? 1 million cars a night?
I'm like Matthias says, this is really interesting conceptually to start thinking about what is it going to do to the grid. It suddenly becomes, it's much more distributed, right? It's these little nodes all around, that happen to be your car. What happens, good thought of when your car can be your backup power at your home. What's that going to do? So I think I think the grid it's going to have to handle it. We're just going to have to figure out how to do that. And again, I go back to, collaboration across the whole value stream of power has got to happen. It's got to unify, and it's got to quit being so fragmented, working with everybody through that value stream. But I agree, it's very exciting.
This is a big enough question. I think we need to hear from all the panelists on this. And every time I see a Tesla going down the road, I turn my head. It gets my attention. And I know there's
That's what $130,000 will do.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, hopefully.
And you're talking about to a guy from Elkhart, Indiana, that drives a beat up old Pinto. Okay. So Alex, how about we get the remaining panelists to comment here?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is, in general, when we talk about this, we all think it's going to happen all at once, and it happens overnight, right? And again, it's just as you go around the globe, right? Probably you will have different shapes and forms, right? But I think probably the same enablers ought to be used. So definitely a smart grid with it would be certainly one lever that we need to pull. In general, when we look at sort of overall, from a power deficit point of view, even today, we do have underinvestment, right? And if anything, it will put some stress into the grid, but probably will be different, in different places. And it's not only one piece of generation, but then what's the stress on, both transmission and distribution, right? That we need to think about. So, I think we probably view it similarly, and I think the main thing again, some places like if you go to Africa, Middle East, or in other places that perhaps are not as connected, perhaps you may not have that happening at the same time. And then when I read that question again, I go back to autonomous driving is the other piece that if I go back to that data point that I shared on out of that Economist article, 100,000 gigabytes a second. Can you imagine, again, the data storage and the data center opportunity, puts a smile on on my face, but I mean, just being able to cope with the data and what you actually do with that type of stuff. I mean, there's a lot more stuff that will come out of it that I think could also be, you know, an opportunity depending on how, you know, how we deal with that too.
Yes, sir.
This is an area that gets me really excited because I have little faith in the utilities being able to actually react, one, quickly, and two, cohesively. So just a couple of stats. There are 3,200 utility companies in the U.S. Here's another stat for you. There are 3,200 regulating bodies of utilities in the U.S. It's a 1-to-1 ratio, which I find fascinating. It speaks a little bit to the regulation side of this, but also I think it speaks to the complexity of trying to come up with a cohesive plan. I think you also have to put it in perspective. You know, there's 165, 170 million vehicles in the U.S. So a million vehicles is, you know, on a percentage basis is still, I think, relatively small, and it may be a while before we actually hit that number. But again, there's no denying it's going to change the complexion of the grid, right? So if it's more distributed, if you now have these assets scattered around, you maybe then have a choice. Do you run your home off of your car, or do you go to work and not, you know, if the power's out? How, you know, what happens if the power's out and I can't charge my car? I need to go to work in the morning. Does a power outage now make us immobile? Which I think is a completely different thing. Today, you can get in your car because of the wonderful technology of gasoline and diesel, as a great conveyance of energy, and you can go in a portable fashion. You can drive where you want to drive. Tomorrow, if the power's out, you can't charge your car. And that's not just at your home, but maybe at your business or wherever your destination is. So I think the necessary uptime of the grid takes on even a greater importance as vehicles, as transportation moves to more electrification. So I think the reliability of the grid becomes that much more important. And again, the utility companies, I think, have proven themselves to be, I think, somewhat incapable in this area of making the right long-term decisions around investment. I think some of that's just the way capitalism is structured, and that's not a comment on the negativity of capitalism. It's just the reality of the fact that most people are looking for returns in the short term. They don't want to wait. You're not buying a utility stock because you want to see a return 30 years from now. You're buying it so you can get a dividend every year. Well, that dividend is cash that's paid out of what could go into investment in transmission and distribution and generation.
Thank you, Aaron.
So I'll take a slightly different turn. You know, my opinion, it's going to take far more than 1 million cars before our electrical grid ever even blips at it, my opinion. If you think about an electrical vehicle and the load that it pulls to charge that, it's somewhere comparable to maybe an air conditioning unit or a hot water heater. We add 1.3 million, 1.4 million houses per year to the grid, and we just seem to plug along. Now we're talking about 1 million cars. I don't know that it's going to take a lot more than that before we actually have the problem. When we do see a problem, it will probably end up being some of those 3,200 utilities. It will be more regional at first before it becomes, some areas have excess capacity, some have, they're already stressed. I think a better question is, how do we get the power that's available from where it is to the places where it's actually needed? I don't know how to do that, but there's somebody out there that could figure it out. And if we can do that, I think it helps give us a little longer runway before this problem becomes that much bigger. So that's my thoughts on it.
Thank you. But I think the consensus is it may be an opportunity for the genset business. Probably is an opportunity. Last question, kind of a wrap question. It's kind of a broad, general question. We'll go to Terri here. And, Charles, if you could handle a follow-up. The power generation industry plays a critical role throughout society. Applications include data centers, municipalities, healthcare, telecom, manufacturing, vital processes, just to name a few, some of which we've talked about today. It is a shared responsibility of everyone in this room to provide the right products for the right applications. By meeting these needs, these applications assure the highest level of system reliability. The question then becomes how to balance manufacturing operations and product reliability to meet the requirements of the community.
I guess when I saw that question, it was thinking about it, kind of not totally understanding of the angle of it, because I think for what we do in anybody, I think of any of the companies that are here at the table, a big part of the image, the brand image of all of these companies is to do the right thing, right? So it's kind of inherent in being a successful business. We need to. I like Charles' discussion this morning about as an industry too, is to, collaborate on doing the right thing and talking about it and emphasizing it. It's going to be important not only for attracting the talent, but again, in terms of the brand and being a sustainable company for a very long period of time. So we've talked a lot about regulations. We get hit with that in all the businesses we do. You can always wait to be regulated into it, or you can take a leadership role in some of these areas and lead. Sometimes when you lead, you avoid regulations. So if you don't do the right thing, that drives regulatory oversight or litigation. So I think it's kind of just fundamental of just being a good business and steward of your reputation.
Thank you. Yeah, it's kind of an open-ended question. Charles?
So I think the real question that's being asked here is if we offer a standard solution for all applications, is someone getting shortchanged or someone missing out? And my answer to that would be absolutely. But the good news is that's not at all what we do. There's common components and common parts from engines to alternators, skids, whatever the case is within the genset. But the real art form comes into how we take those common parts and create a customized solution, whether it's for healthcare, data center, water treatment, telecom, whatever channel or application that we're working within. So, having those common platforms of parts helps from a servicing standpoint, helps from a reliability, and to some areas, in some ways, the complexity of design is diminished by doing that. But, we pride ourselves at Kohler Company on being very customizable for our end users, for our customers. And we sit closely with them. We have a very large ES or engineered specials team at Kohler that gets very involved, in every aspect of the entire specification process to make sure that in the end, the package that we're offering, it's built in one system, it's built in-house and it's designed in-house and it's tested in-house under one roof with that customer's end needs and requirements in mind to ensure that no one is shortchanged based on the application.
Thank you. We can treat this as a wrap question if the other three panelists want to finish up with this. Matthias?
Yeah. I think putting MTU in a bigger perspective at Rolls-Royce, we really built a business model about mission critical. So everything what we do is mission critical. You don't want to sit up on a plane and basically saying, oops, the turbine just went off. So we're monitoring every turbine on every plane every 5 seconds around the world. If it's alive, how it's doing. On our ships, every ship we do everything that's mission critical, and the same is for me for power generation. So I think in this business of healthcare, data center, municipalities, telecom, this is all driven by really demand of society, really people behind it, and if something fails, somebody could die. So there's just an option to fail. So really, we're taking care on quality at the highest level and safety. And that's why I feel very comfortable in this industry, in this community, because I think all of my colleagues do that the same way. And I think it's our duty to do it like this.
Yeah, I saw the question, frankly, as a kind of an end-to-end question, right? So as an industry, a lot of bad things can happen with the product. If it's misspecified, misapplied, misinstalled, mismanufactured. There's a lot of misses along the way, right, that can happen. Working together as an industry, right? It starts with the engineering community and with the technical sales process that many of these products go through, comes to the manufacturing environment, whether it goes into a specials engineering or an applications engineering group, and then into manufacturing on the floor, right? Building a high quality product is table stakes today. As a manufacturer, that's just, that's kind of the price of poker. But doing that and doing that only isn't enough in our kind of an industry because it's an installed product. And we can build a great product, but if it's the wrong product for a different, for the wrong application, you're still not going to get a right result. Or if you build a great product and it's not installed properly, not commissioned properly, you're going to get the wrong result. So from our standpoint, we view it's very critical to insert ourselves into each element of the value chain, from the front end with the engineering community, all the way through doing what we do as manufacturers. And then on the back end, with the technicians, with our distribution partners, we're zealots about training. I think if there's anything you know about us in the industry is we focus more on training than than most. And I think that's the realization that we simply have to have a modicum of control or a modicum of quality there that we need to be controlling. And we need to help the industry, not only because there are fewer technicians than we need overall, but also because the technical knowledge of the equipment continues to change. I mean, you're working on, it's like your car, like my comment about the car before. If you're working on a generator today is much different than the generator 30 years ago. The equipment, the technology is very sophisticated, and it's even, it's just going more so that direction. And so I saw it more as an end-to-end question. How can we work together as an industry across, the entire spectrum to make sure that the right product gets in the right place and is even the operations end of it is operated correctly.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Last but not
Yeah, so the way I looked at it was a combination of both what Charles and what Aaron said. So I do think, we do, and I've, having been with Cummins for some time and worked in many, many markets, it's a power generation market is probably one of the most, if not the most diverse market, I've ever worked in my professional career, which makes it a lot of fun for, all of us in the industry, right? But, how you serve that, with the right balance, right, and still make, a dime in a way that it's, profitable it is challenging, right? But it is, I think a lot of it's a combination of, one thing that we do is we do try to design and manufacture the product very close to our customer base, but not giving up the platforming concept. So, really, looking at, both aspects, but, and then, with that, we also try to, for the folks that are actually on the Gearhead tour, for example, you're going to go visit Friedley today. That is predominantly our facility for, North America, but we do serve quite a bit of our 60 hertz markets from here, right? And you also try to drive scale, from there, as one example. But then, the point that Aaron mentioned is also very important, right? We should just not think about if you've done, all your design validation and the engineering work done well, and you put this in the plant, that you're just going to have product reliability. It's how you apply the product, how you service that is equally as important. And again, you can really only do that, really at the local level, staying, close to our customers, right? So that would be my take.
That was our last question, and we're out of time. Inevitably, there will be a hallway discussion or a barroom conversation today on who won this summit, even though this is not a competitive event. Sitting here, I can tell you folks who won. Rob Eberhardt from Fidelity Power won today. Mitch Dinnerman from Assurance Power won. Ring Power was a winner. Chuck Gold, big time winner today. Mike Sanford from Cummins won this morning at the Executive Leadership Summit here in Minneapolis. You see, folks, we all won. EGSA membership in the entire on-site power generation industry won this morning. We're all winners, and we thank the panel very much for making that possible. How about a nice round of applause for our distinguished panel members? Now, we have a gift.
Thank you.
If you folks could meet me over here, if we come around, and then if we can line up out front for a photo. How about Matthias? Here we go. Matthias?
What do I get?
Thank you. Yes,
It's not going to fit in my bag.
Thank you very much. You can line up over here for a photo.
I will.
I'll get out of the way.
Okay. Charles? Thank you very much, sir.
Charles.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Whoop. Terri? Thank you very much. And Mr. Alex? Thank you, sir. How about one more round of applause, folks?